Now, a key thing in designing goals and keeping up with them and actually achieving them is giving feedback of how close you are to achieving that goal. For instance, in many games, you will get experience points showing you how many more points you need to get to the next level. Sometimes you'll have a map to show you, okay, I've gotten so far, but I need to get so much further. Or it looks like I've got the good items, I can now go further, and things are changing. And hey, it looks like the game realm is changing, so I must be doing good. How do we do this? Well, we use something called feedback loops. To figure out when a goal is reached, you need something called feedback loops. Now, feedback loops, funny enough, are also something very handy in being able to track human behavior, because most human behavior can be tracked in habitual feedback loops. A habit is basically partaking multiple times into a certain feedback loop whereby the neurons in our brains start to see these different similarities and loops happening, and they get stronger and stronger together. When we provide new games, right, and we start engaging and tackling these feedback loops of players, giving them an extra challenge, we're actually able to hack into those habits and feedback loops and see if we can change them. How does a feedback loop work? It all starts with a cue. There's a visual cue, an audio cue, a smell cue, a taste cue. Some kind of cue happens, right, to start the program sequence. And that's what happens. The cue then starts a routine of neurons. So for instance, we see something happen and cue goes in, signal goes in, into our brain. All of a sudden, all of these neurons are firing off and doing their little routine. And then that routine is then it gets some kind of reward or outcome that comes from that. And that reward is then the next cue to say, okay, that routine is quit. Now, I can imagine that's a little crazy to understand, so let's just take an example to look at. You're driving in your car, driving down the street. All of a sudden, you're driving and you see a green light. Now, that green light is the visual cue. And your brain knows, because of the neurons, you've been programmed to know that green means go. So what happens is in your brain, back here in the back, not in the front, but back here in the back, these routines start to go, and you basically drive straight through the intersection without having to worry about braking or decelerating or anything. Now, that routine of driving through the intersection is then the reward once you get on the other side to stop worrying about that cue, because you're through the intersection already. Now you're focused on the next cue. That's the feedback loop. Now, if a different cue happens, let's say a red light goes. Now, all of a sudden, your brain starts to do a different routine. It starts to brake on the brakes, hopefully, if you're a good driver. You start to step on the brakes, and your mind starts to take over calculations, and extremely difficult calculations, if I may add, of distance, deceleration, acceleration, physics, multiple objects moving at speeds much faster than humanly possible, all coming and colliding, and you are navigating this multi-ton vehicle through that. All of these neurons are going on firing, all of that, right? Trying to figure all this out in the back of the brain, leaving the frontal lobe to figure out what you're going to do for dinner. This is how feedback loops work. What would happen if you say you all of a sudden put a fourth light there, a blue light? Imagine what you could do or jolt someone out of what they're thinking about if all of a sudden there's a new visual cue there. Well, there have been experiments done where they are taking and putting lights on the streets at intersections for a new signal cue. And that cue is to show the subway going underneath. So people in traffic can now see how fast the subway is going and that it's not stopping in traffic like they are. Now, because of this visual cue, the hope is that people will start to take the subway more rather than stand in traffic all the time with their cars.